Hey everyone, Happy New Year, and we want to say Happy New Year and welcome to the very first Radiotopia Presents of 2024. It's a series that we are truly excited about. It's called Shocking, Heartbreaking, Transformative. Now, this is from documentarian Jess Shane, who put out an open call on Craigslist and then worked with 4 strangers to explore the standard rules that documentarians and journalists use to tell their subject stories. So the series gets into all sorts of questions about what happens when people's real lives are collected, edited, and consumed. The show pulls back the curtain on what goes on behind the scenes of your favorite nonfiction shows. And then it turns in on itself and some really interesting twists and turns along the way in the making of the show. I've gotten to know Jess a little bit over the making of this show. Every time I chat with her, there's a new wrinkle to this story. It is really incredible. So go check out the new Radiotopia Presents series, Shocking, Heartbreaking, Transformative. It is out now on your favorite podcast platform. Hello and welcome to This Day in Esoteric Political History from Radiotopia. My name is Jody Avergan. This day, April 29th, 1854, by an act of the Pennsylvania legislature, the Ashmun Institute is founded, the first college founded solely for African American students. This is the day on which it was officially chartered. Ashmun, the college was named after Jody Ashmun, a Quaker leader and social reformer who was very active in the American Colonization Society, that early Back to Africa movement. We've done an episode on that before if you want to go listen. It is no longer called the Ashmun Institute. It is now known as Lincoln University, and it is the oldest HBCU in the country. Or is it? Here to discuss is, as always, Nicole Hammer of Columbia and Kellie Carter-Jackson of Wellesley. Hello.
Hey, Jody.
Hey there.
So Kellie, I have my little cliffhanger in the intro there. What is that's what counts for cliffhanger on this show. What is the controversy, including with Ashmun, about what is the oldest HBCU in the country?
So there is a question as to, are they the oldest university, the first degree granting university? I mean, there's so many caveats that could be put on the first one to educate, African Americans, and specifically African Americans, and have a charter attached to them. So there are a lot of different pivots that people use to establish themselves as the first. But this rivalry goes back so old. I mean, if you think about Cheney University, that has on its website, we are the first and oldest historically Black college, dating back to like 1834. But these rivalries are pretty common. Even my own alma mater, Howard University, we go back and forth about what is the real HU, Howard University or Hampton University. So they're fun, I think, but historically it depends on how you want to categorize what you mean by first, and if you mean by granting institutions or which was the first university, which is the first college, all of that, it depends on semantics.
So Cheney's claim is that it was the first institution of higher learning, and it was founded a decade or so before Ashmun. Ashmun was the first, as I gather, to actually offer degrees.
Yes.
So that seems to be one of the distinctions. And then every once in a while in these conversations, Wilberforce University in Ohio sneaks in because in 1856, and on their website, they bill themselves as the nation's oldest private historically Black university. Yes. They seem to be the first one that was founded by that had a black leadership and Black founders. So this reminds me a lot of like, the oldest bar in America, and then it's like continuously operated by one owner, and never closed in a fire or whatever. My parents live in a town that claims to have the oldest inn in America, but it's got like these 5 caveats after it about, so forth. But,
having that claim to fame, though, is just so, it's like it's bragging rights is what it is.
Yeah, just keep an eye on how many adjectives there are describing what exactly it is the oldest of.
So, Niki, what is your sense, though, in the founding of Ashmun? How does it come together, and who are the, we mentioned that it's named after this man, what's his name? Let's put him on the list of great names that we encountered. Jody Ashmun. What does it mean that it is named after this white man in Pennsylvania?
So, I mean, it's a pretty good snapshot of the distinction between something like Ashmun Institute and Wilberforce, because the Ashmun Institute was founded by white Quakers. The Quakers were pretty involved in both the American colonization movement, but also in the abolition movement. And they saw as part of their project the founding of colleges like Ashmun. Although I will say Ashmun from the start was open to and encouraging of white students to enroll. And so there's a way in which it's a historically Black college, but it also is, it's an integrated. So it has kind of those two legacies to it, because I think of who the founders were and what they were trying to do there in Pennsylvania.
And we should say that most of the first presidents of historically Black colleges and universities were white people, or white men, I should say. And so that becomes sort of like the genesis story for a lot of these schools. You have like Howard University is named after, General Oliver Otis Howard. And so when you think about the fact that there's white leadership at the helm, it's not unusual at the time to have that and to have white students attending initially, at least.
When we did that episode about the ACS and the Colonization Society, we talked a lot about the sort of emerging different strands of abolition and anti-slavery. And in there, we talked about how there was first off, there was a sort of very patriarchal, patronizing sort of approach in many ways. We're going to help take ex-slaves or take slaves and send them back to Africa, and in a way to avoid the sort of confronting the problem here in this country. And I wonder if there's any of that, Kellie, as you see it floating around in here, establishing an institution rather than say fighting for integration of established white institutions. I mean,
most HBCUs are started to train preachers and teachers, and that expands, as we get closer to the 20th century. But that initial idea about using schools as a way to create ministers who can go out and sort of serve as missionaries to the broader public and all throughout the world really was something at the forefront of a lot of these schools. And then also teaching teachers or educating students to become teachers to also educate other people was a big part of that as well. So I always think that when we think about education in general, and this is at white schools and Black schools, the idea of training people up to be a particular kind of citizen or to contribute a particular skill or mindset, perpetuate a particular kind of mindset, is at the forefront of all of these institutions.
Yeah, and this is a moment in 1854 that mission of education is actually, the language doesn't sound particularly paternalistic. It is coming at a moment when education is forbidden for enslaved people in the South. It's coming at a moment when the laws around free Black people were becoming more and more strict. So in the 1830s, Pennsylvania outlaws Black voting. And so it is a kind of act of rebellion in some ways against those ideas. And I think that's an important context for Ashmun.
I'm curious, Kellie, you said, this idea of an institution that is built to train a certain kind of citizen, build up a certain kind of citizen. Did you feel that at all when you were at Howard? Many, many years later, but yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And all of these HBCUs have such rich histories and notable alumni that when you go to these schools, you are inculcated with the idea that you epitomize Black excellence. You are, right now, I think Howard alum are kind of insufferable because we're all like thinking about the vice presidency and thinking about all of these different, when we think of like Stacey Abrams, she's a Spelman alum, like HBCUs are running it lately and we're kind of loving that. But I do think that when you go there, you feel a part of a historical heritage. When you think about Ashmun Institute, which later becomes Lincoln University, Thurgood Marshall graduates from there, and Langston Hughes graduates from there. You have so many famous, notable alumni that you want to sort of perpetuate that.
Gil Scott Heron, by the way. That one caught my eye.
When I saw that name, I was like, oh, that's Jody will pick that one up.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I know. It's really cool. I mean, one of the things I love about going back to Howard is to be able to like see all of the, alumni and sort of like call out these famous people and see yourselves like, in the same shared spaces with them, wherever you lived in a dorm or what building you took classes in. Like that's really powerful.
Given that HBCUs come out of segregation, that they come out of a lack of opportunity, they become the training ground of the Black elites, and they become this very powerful space for networking and connections and history and sort of a shared culture that it's really powerful.
It's like a fraternity or sorority.
Yeah.
It is. There's a lot of, I should say, there is a lot of competition. As a Howard alum, I'm always talking smack about Hampton. But when it comes down to like how we feel about each other, how we feel about our institutions, there's so much pride there. I got to go to Lincoln University for the first time, I think maybe a few years ago, in 2018, I want to say, to give a speaking engagement. And the campus is beautiful. It's out in like Amish country, or are the Amish that are there? I think it's the Amish.
Yeah.
But it's beautiful, and these are places where you can just take pride in feeling like other people shared this space with you and the legacy of that, and the bragging rights. This
is far too magnanimous, Kellie. I want to stay on the rivalries and the talking smack.
He's like, what are you going to say about Spelman people?
Yeah, exactly.
I can talk smack all
at the end, I want to ask you if you feel like Howard has won the HBCU wars, but we'll get to that.
Totally.
Okay, we'll get to that. But,
that's a preview.
But in this moment, I mean, it does seem like we have the year we're talking about here is 1853, 1854. It does seem in the aftermath of the Civil War certainly is a moment where a lot of these schools are founded around the country.
Oh, yeah.
And certainly, I think it's pretty obvious why Ashmun changes its name to Lincoln University after the assassination. But Kellie, I'm curious what you think about that sort of burgeoning, and then also just this idea that I think a lot of people, when they think HBCUs, they think Southern institutions. And you look at this early crop, and a lot of them are in Pennsylvania, Ohio. I mean, we can have that big argument about whether D.C. is the South or not, but Howard, it's not the deep South. So what do you make of that?
It's really interesting because I would say most of the HBCUs are in the South. So I think of Tennessee, I think of Louisiana, Texas, Georgia for sure, Mississippi, Alabama, Tuskegee, the famed Tuskegee Institute. I think of Fisk. I think of all of these places in which this is where Black people were. The majority of Black people were in the South. And so if you wanted to create these institutions, you had to build them where Black people were. And so that's part of it. Black people are in Ohio. Free Black people are in Ohio in large pockets. Lots of Black people are in Pennsylvania and in the nation's capital. And so that's why you don't see a lot of historically Black colleges in Boston or in, New York City or things of that nature, or California even. They were built around the communities that they were intended to serve. And so that is why you see a lot of that. But I also think that most people don't really know like which HBCUs are actually considered HBCUs and like what qualifies you to be historically Black college. I think that's what allows them to be these distinguished institutions, is that they're created to serve largely African-American students. Although 1 in 4 now are non-African-American or non-Black. But that I think is, sort of the beauty of this, that these were intended to serve a population that had been marginalized.
Yeah, I would add like one structural layer on as well, and that is in 1890 you get the passage of the Second Morrill Act, and it requires in the funding of land grant universities, that if you're in a segregated space, that you have to create a land grant university for Black students as well as white students. And so that leads in the late 19th century to the growth of another surge of historically Black colleges and universities in the South as well. So there's a lot of things that are feeding into this growth, to the extent that you have, how many now, Kellie?
Oh gosh, there's at least 101 HBCUs. So I mean, there's so many. There's some that I don't even know about, and I kind of pride myself on knowing almost all of them. But there are some that are smaller, and that don't have the sort of prominence. I feel like we are familiar with your sort of top five, which is your Howards, your Hamptons, Spelman, Morehouse, FAMU is a part of that. But also I think Lincoln and Fisk and Texas Southern and Southern Louisiana, Xavier is big. All of these schools became big because when you wanted to find that Black doctor, that Black lawyer, that Black engineer, these were the schools that you had to go to because white schools weren't graduating Black students in that way. So even when we think about, Hidden Figures and the NASA program, like they had to go to these Black institutions like Virginia Union and Hampton to find Black talent.
And that actually connects to something that Niki just said about the sort of the Morrill Act, MORRIL, that created land grant universities. And I just had always heard this phrase, land grant university, and it wasn't until here that I finally got my head around what that actually is. But, these were acts that basically said we're going to offer public land to institutions of higher learning. And that's where a lot of public universities, and also, as you were saying, Kellie, a lot of universities that are more geared towards agricultural science, military science, engineering, a lot of those universities come out of this land grant programs as opposed to like private liberal art colleges, which often have private land and so forth. So that is where you get that phrase and and you actually sort of see that connection between the structure of how the university is founded and the kinds of teaching as we've been discussing.
And it's interesting too because a lot of these schools they dub themselves, like Lincoln University is dubbed like the Black Princeton.
Yeah.
They have a way of saying like, oh my gosh, our colors are similar, our mascots are similar. Like our president was actually educated at Princeton, so we're just gonna dub ourselves the Black Princeton. And there's a lot of pride about it.
And they're like really close to each other, right? Just like 20 miles or something, right? So
yeah. But even at Howard, people are like, oh, Howard, isn't it the Black Harvard or whatever? And I'm like, no, Harvard is the white Howard.
So as we wrap up, I want to get your thoughts on one other element here, which is we've named some of the prominent alumni of Lincoln University, but you look at that list and there are also a number of really notable folks from other countries who have come and become educated at Lincoln. So the first president of Nigeria, the first president of Ghana, a bunch of people in the 70s and 80s, Black South Africans came and got educated and then became leaders, business leaders, political leaders when they returned. And I'm curious, what your thoughts are on that sort of, I don't even know what to call it, like the sort of reverse diaspora or something, of Black leaders from other places coming to the United States.
That's what makes HBCUs so special is because, we know that being Black is not a monolith, but the idea that you have an entire diaspora of not just people from Africa, but also from the West Indies. I think of Eric Williams, who's the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago, attends Howard University. So you have people coming from all four corners of the world to be educated because of the rich legacy, one. Two, because it's one of the few places that they can actually be educated in a safe space, quote unquote. And then also they can take that back and then connect these bridges between one institution and an entire country. So the relationships that Ghana has with Howard and with Lincoln, simply because Kwame Nkrumah is the president, was educated there. And then Kwame Nkrumah's son, I think, attends Howard University. So there are all of these connections throughout the diaspora that really make being Black feel so global.
I like that you're doing very good analysis, but you are certainly sprinkling in a lot of very prestigious Howard alums.
You noticed that?
Yeah, I noticed that.
She came in with a mission.
I sure did.
Okay, so as we wrap up, give us your 30 seconds. Why is Howard top of the list?
Oh my gosh. I mean, 30 seconds is not enough time at all. But I will say this, I feel like I found myself at Howard University.
Yeah.
I was embraced, and I got to see what Black excellence looked like up close, and I got to see professors that assumed I was smart, assumed I was talented and ready for the task. And so, and also, I think being in Washington, D.C., in the nation's capital, you feel like you're in the heart of so much. And it's just a special place to be educated. And now, you know, the home, too, of our Vice President, Kamala Harris. I had to throw that in there.
I think you're legally required to as a function of your degree.
I think so.
And you can walk to Ben's Chili Bowl for lunch, which is, I've always been jealous of.
Good times in D.C. Good times.
Oh, yeah. Okay, well, that brings us to the end of the episode. Nicole Hemmer, thanks to you as always.
Thank you, Jody.
And Kellie Carter-Jackson, thanks to you.
My pleasure.
This Day in Esoteric Political History is a proud member of Radiotopia from PRX, a network of independent, listener-supported, artist-owned podcasts. So if you want to become a supporter of this show and the work that we do at Radiotopia in general, you can go on our website, thisdaypod.com, and find a way to support. One-time donation, monthly donation. We really do appreciate it. Our researcher and producer is Jacob Feldman. Our producer is Brittany Brown. You can get in touch with us with any questions or comments or ideas for the show. Email us thisdaypod@gmail.com, or you can find a form at thisdaypod.com. My name is Jody Avirgan. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you soon.
Radiotopia from PRX.